It's officially game week. Let's go.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rao, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers, and guess what, folks? We made it. It's game week. Week 0 is here. We are in week 0. This Saturday, we will see Avery Johnson, Dylan Edwards, Austin Romaine, VJ Payne, you name it. We'll see them on the field in Dublin, Ireland against Iowa State. New depth chart came out. Got a lot to talk about there. We'll dive into that just a little bit. We'll have more on that thoughts in the coming weeks. But there's a big question on my mind that I want to discuss on this show. Can the Wildcats running back room survive without DJ Giddens? And the depth chart is giving me some interesting things to talk about as well. This year's backfield could be faster, could be really exciting. So there's lots to talk about there. Then we'll flip the calendar and talk bye weeks, because although it is week 0, because of week 0, we get 3 bye weeks in this season. And is that necessarily a good thing? We'll talk about that on this episode. And finally, we'll wrap up in a deep dive into special teams. We got some more of a good feeling, more transparency about what's going on with the special teams. So we'll talk about that on this show. Let's get into it. Let's start talking. Before we dive into it, though, this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, I got to know here. If you're feeling the same way I am, let me know in the comment description below. But I feel like this is a narrative that not many people talk about when you're thinking about Kansas State's offense. You talk about, obviously, the main attraction is Avery Johnson. Can he step up? Can he be this quarterback that everybody knows he can be after having some issues in the second half of the season last year? Great. Got it. We'll talk about more on his confidence in a later episode heading into the Iowa State, because I think there's a lot to talk about in that. And then, of course, the wide receiver talk, especially when it comes to the transfer portal. Wide receivers, they haven't lived up to the hype coming in for the transfer portal. Well, Chris Klieman and his recruiting staff went right back to the well, folks. Went to the transfer portal and grabbed some new wide receivers. A lot of hype there, a lot of interesting hype. But this time, we get size. And we're seeing a lot of interesting moves in the spring from Tibbs, Bradley, etc., to make you feel like this could be the year where we finally get rid of the narrative about talking about transfer portal wide receivers and the lack of success there is. But I want to talk about the running back room, because although we've seen some great performances from Dylan Edwards, especially as of lately, the most recent performance in the Rape Bowl game, how are they going to be without their bell cow, their workhorse, in DJ Giddens? The fact that you had DJ Giddens in the backfield last year completely changed your offense. The fact that he was there, Connor Riley, Matt Wells, whoever was running the plays, knew they had to feed him. They had to get him the ball, because when you're getting close to 7 yards to carry, why not? Why not do that? Well, this year is going to feel a little different. And I wonder if that's a good thing or if that's a bad thing. Because although you don't have DJ Giddens in the backfield, you do have a plethora of amazing talent in this running back room that could turn this offense on its head and make a brand new feeling to this offense. One that might make it more improved and might get them back to Arlington, which is the ultimate goal. You get to Arlington, you have a 50-50 shot at a guaranteed college football playoff, and then you can talk at large bids, whatever you want to afterwards. But you get to Arlington, and then it's a coin flip. But I like this running back room. I like Dylan Edwards. He's more comfortable in the offense this year, of course. Playbook master, probably. And you're going to see him not only in the backfield, you're going to see him all over the place. We saw it in the Rape Bowl as well. Jet sweeps, his outside tackle running. He has, his one cut is so amazing. I mean, some of his biggest runs of the season, he wasn't even touched. It's absolutely impressive. I think getting more carries from Dylan Edwards in the traditional way, and probably in ways that'll be counted as a reception, whether that's an actual pass or whatever the case that may be, is going to be great. And I think when you look at it as a running back room altogether, if you can take the leash off Dylan Edwards, which that didn't happen fully last year. It didn't. And you can say that was a mistake. You can say that was because they had to find a way to feed DJG. I don't know. And you could also put in the fact because he was a prime key on special teams, which it sounds like he's going to be once again. But the fact that he is going to be your top running back, your top dog on the team this season, it makes me excited. And I think this running back room could be better this year than it was last year with DJ Giddens. And that's not a knock to the current Indianapolis Colt running back, who I think he's killing it in preseason. I'm really excited to see what he can do in the NFL. I just really like this room as a whole. And of course, Brian Anderson leading the charge as a running back coach. He does a great job. And when you get to hear him talk, you can tell that he coaches his players to be a unit. And it's very exciting knowing that they have this experience. They got to have, Dylan Edwards got to have this experience behind DJ Giddens, same with Joe Jackson as well. Now you're bringing in a guy like Antonio Martin, who has a lot of college experience, has a lot of carries. Coach Anderson was saying that it's taken some time for him to catch up to this system, though. So I'm not sure how much we'll see of him in Iowa State. On the depth chart, he was not listed as the third running back, so something to keep in mind. But having that type of power in your arsenal is fantastic. And the fact that he's not running back 3 of what we all expected to be when he came in the portal just shows that much more at the depth piece for this room. Devon Rice, again, I mean, he's the buzz player of the offseason, at least of the last couple weeks. He has been the buzz player of fall camp. End stop, period, end of conversation. It's been Devon Rice. We keep hearing about him everywhere. Offensive coordinator talk, wide receiver talk, running back room, special teams side. Devon Rice is everywhere. And he's also seen on the depth chart a lot bigger than we expected. He's right behind Dylan Edwards in the running back room. Of course, Joe Jackson as running back 2, but it's Devon Rice right behind Dylan Edwards on the depth chart. They do show 2 running backs on the depth chart, so keep that in mind. So he's running back 3. And then it's JB Price. So we got 2 redshirt freshmen behind Joe Jackson and Dylan Edwards. Devon Rice, JB Price. And then you have Antonio Martin and Montario Elston Jr. That's a deep room. Technically, Antonio Martin, the one who we thought was going to be RB3, is 5 right now. And that could just be a sign, and maybe a sign of respect to the folks that were here in spring. It could be. And we might see it differently. Who knows? But it's exciting stuff for this running back room. What do I think is going to happen in Dublin? I think Dylan Edwards is going to go off. I thought personally that Antonio Martin, with the way that he was a big guy in goal line situations, I thought that might be something. I think that's going to be Joe Jackson. I think he's going to be given it. And then I think we're going to see a breakout play from Devon Rice. We have heard too much of Devon Rice, a guy that didn't have to be marqueed, didn't have to be marketed the way he is. We have heard too much about him this fall to not see something crazy happen. Devon Rice is going to make a big play on Saturday. Be ready for it. Special teams, out of the backfield, in the slot. I can't tell you where, but we're going to hear his name, and it's going to be because of a big play. Lots more to talk about here. This running back room here, overall, can they be as good as they were last year? I'm saying yes. Will we have a 1,000-yard rusher? I think so. Will we have a running back that has at least 10 touchdowns? I think that's fair. Sure. Who will it be when it comes to the goal line for rushings? That's a different story. Can Dylan Edwards and Joe Jackson both get 10 touchdowns? I'm not going to lie to you. I think that's completely possible. I think Joe Jackson's going to get a lot of those short yardage situations inside the tackles. I think you're going to see him more as the traditional running back on longer second downs, third downs for sure. But it doesn't mean Dylan Edwards isn't going to be out there. I think we're going to see him all over the field. It's going to be very hard to contain him and Jace Brown at the very exact same time. And who knows what Devon Rice is going to be now. I'm trying to say Devon Rice's name as much as possible because I don't think we've talked about him enough compared to what the rest of the coaching staff and everybody else is saying. Sounds like we have a breakout player in the making in Devon Rice. Third string running back on the depth chart right now, but that means nothing. We all know that. Joe Jackson was RB3 last year. You know how we all love Joe Jackson. We've talked about him in a great way. Coach Anderson called it the deepest running back room he's ever had since he's been at Kansas State, and it's hard not to disagree what Coach has to say on this one. Next, let's first of all, it's not about replacing DJ Giddens. It's about reshaping the offense, and I think that's exactly what they're doing. If this group plays to their speed and versatility, because I think that's exactly what it is. Versatility is the characteristic and the key word for this running back room. They will be more dangerous than last year's unit. And that speed, that rhythm, it's going to be huge all year long. Bye weeks. With week 0 coming up, you got 3 bye weeks now on the schedule because you play a week earlier. Is that a good thing? We'll talk about that next, right here on Locked On Kansas State. Hey, when I'm on top of my hydration, I notice everything just works better. My energy, my mood, my focus, even my skin, but enough fluids every day isn't easy. And I think you know that for sure, but that's why I've been loving Drip Drop. It's an easy way to get that extra hydration in, and it tastes delicious while you're doing it. Drip Drop's a doctor-developed and scientifically proven for fast hydration, uses the perfect balance of sodium, electrolytes, and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of that leading sports drink. I am a huge advocate of their orange, but I got the variety pack, and I've been really liking watermelon lately too. That watermelon flavor is good. They got the lemon. There's a berry one in there too. I usually don't like berry, anything, but the Drip Drop berry, it hits, especially on some of these warm days. And right now, Drip Drop's offering Locked On listener 20% off your first order. So just head to dripdrop.com, use that promo code Locked On College, all one word, and you'll get 20% off. That's dripdrop.com, promo code Locked On College for 20% off. Stock up now before it hits hard. That heat is what I'm talking about. You can use Drip Drop and make it all better. 48-28. That is the overall record of what Chris Klieman is since he has been the head coach at Kansas State. That's a great record when you look at it in just that scope. 20 games over 500. Gotta love that. But let's dig into it just a little bit more. If I told you that a record of 7-8 was also a record for Chris Klieman, you probably wouldn't think so highly. And that is exactly what I'm about to talk about, because after bye weeks, Chris Klieman's staff, his entire teams, since being in Manhattan, are 7-8, below 500. And that's something he's going to have to handle not just 2 times like you normally do in a season, but 3 times this year in this 2025 season because of the week 0 matchup in Dublin. You are awarded an extra bye week because you do start a week earlier. So obviously, in order to get the 12 games that everybody else is going to get, you have 1 extra open week. So there is a chance to get back to being over 500 and hopefully going 3-0 and get yourself to 10-8 after bye weeks. That's the best case scenario for Chris Klieman, and to get rid of this narrative that he is not good after taking a week off, if that's even a narrative whatsoever. And to be completely honest, the fact that you're talking about a 76 game sample, and then you're only talking about 15 of those 76 games, it's not the biggest sample size, but I think it's enough to raise some eyebrows when you have 3 games this season. And thankfully, these, for the most part, 3 of these games aren't anything crazy. It still makes you wonder, is this something that you need to be concerned about for Chris Klieman, for Kansas State heading into this year? A year where you think that you are good enough to not only make it to Arlington, but go to the college football playoffs with Avery Johnson as your quarterback, making a strong step forward in year 2, bringing in the right weapons on offense, your offensive line, some great transfer additions. Your defense seems to be stepped up in the right ways. Will the secondary step up? That is yet to be determined. That's really my biggest concern on the defense, but we'll talk about that in a different episode. This year's post-bye matchups, you got 3 of them, as I mentioned. And because of the Dublin game, all of these are heading into a conference game, which is crazy to think about. Maybe that's a good thing, but let's talk about what this is. The first bye week is after the Arizona game, which, again, this is on the road, a Friday night in Arizona, Although it's a Big 12 opponent, it is not a Big 12 conference game. So you're going to take on your second Big 12 opponent, actual conference game, after the Arizona game. Of course, Iowa State being the first one, back at home in Manhattan against UCF. You technically have more than a week in this one because you're at the Friday game and then you play the following Saturday. So this is a 8-day bye week to start off the season for your first bye week of the year. Hey, UCF's tempo has always been a thing. We don't know what's going on with their quarterback situation. UCF with Scott Frost returning back as the head coach, there's a lot of question marks. And many of us, I know the Big 12 power rankings came out, our preseason poll on the Locked On Podcast Network. Our host of Locked On Big 12, Drake Pohl, just put out his predictions. UCF is towards the bottom. But that shouldn't make you completely forget about UCF. They are still a Big 12 school, right? Scott Frost, when he was with UCF a few years ago before the disasters happened in Nebraska, I mean, brought him to the pretty magical season. 2015, I believe that was. Don't quote me on what the year it was. I'm all over the place with numbers today. Here's the second bye week that makes me a little nervous, folks. A little nervous. That second bye week, you play TCU at home first, and then you have a week off, and then you got to go to Lawrence to take on Kansas for the Sunflower Showdown. Obviously, a rivalry game. We all know about that. I don't have to explain to you what Kansas versus Kansas State is, the 16-game win streak. I don't have to explain that to you. But if you want more of that, I just talked to Derek Johnson of Locked On Jayhawks on yesterday's episode, a Sunday special, and you can check that out on the channels or wherever you're listening on audio. But hey, look, I'll say this, although it's concerning because this game, until Kansas beats us, obviously Kansas State runs the rivalry, but they've been close the last 2 years. And you got to have this feeling of like, could it happen? The year where you think Kansas State is going to be so dang good screams a perfect opportunity for Kansas to just come play spoiler. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but like if it did happen, would you be shocked after what happened the last 2 years? I will say this for this one, Kansas also is going in to this game on a bye. I don't know the record of Leipold's record after the bye. I don't have that stat in front of me. If you're listening and you want to leave a comment, let me know what Leipold's stats is after bye weeks. You could drop it in the comments, let all the everydayers know. But they're both coming off a bye week, which I think is going to make this game even more exciting. That means we're going to talk about this game for multiple weeks heading up to it. And if motivation is anything a reason why Chris Klieman is 7-8 with his players heading into a game after the bye week, it won't matter when this one happens. There will be no need for finding motivation when they are getting ready to head up to Lawrence. This game will be electric. This game will be on fire. It always is. It's just something to keep in mind. Concerned, right? And then the final post-bye matchup will be after Texas Tech. That one's in Manhattan once again. Texas Tech, we all know how much money they spent. They could be a really good team this year. They're putting out some stuff on their YouTube channel, the official Texas Tech YouTube channel, and Coach McGuire showed it in episode 1 where they said their goal is to win the Big 12. So just like Kansas State here, we're not the only team, and of course we're not, that has the goal of winning the conference in 2025. But after that Texas Tech game, you got a week off, and then you head to Stillwater against the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Didn't win a single Big 12 game last year. Mike Gundy's looking for revenge on the entire conference. And of course, they're not going to be as bad as they were last year. And we don't play good in Stillwater. That's probably the most concerning one out of the 3, if we had to put something into perspective for bye weeks, in my opinion, is that one. I'm not too worried about the UCF game. The Kansas game, I'm not worried about in a motivational standpoint. I don't think the bye week will have anything to do with it, although I am concerned about that 16-game win streak. I think you have to keep that into perspective just based on the last 2 games of the Sunflower Showdown. But we are not good in Stillwater, folks. Kansas State has not had a great record history playing Oklahoma State on the road. And this is later on in the season. This could have Big 12 championship implications, at least for Kansas State. I don't think the Cowboys are going to be there, but it could mean bowl eligibility for them. And they could easily try and play spoiler. And hopefully it's not a game that Kansas State overlooks. What are some of the reasons maybe for some of these past struggles? Is it a disrupted routine? Is it over preparation? And then you start bad, like emotional letdowns? Like, I don't know. But I will say this. With the 3 buys, that means you get more rest. And we've already had injuries. For example, not having our starting left tackle for this week 0 game. Having more rest means more opportunities to have your depth be prepared and your starters be prepared to play in those games. But it does mean more opportunities to lose rhythm. So keep that one in mind. Veteran leadership needs to keep this team focused. And I think that needs to be something that you are already working on right now. And I think the Dublin game might actually help this because you already are going to have a crazy travel schedule right off the bat. Kansas State leaving for Ireland on Wednesday and they play on Saturday. Then they're heading right back just a day later because it's game week, right? They got to play North Dakota right after this, the week after. So the veteran leadership has to stick up. They have to step up. They have to make sure everybody's prepared. And when a bye week does happen, they can't lose focus. They need to treat those weeks like normal weeks, not bye weeks under Chris Klieman. And until he proves otherwise, now if they lose 2 or 3 of those games after a bye, I think that's actually a conversation we might have, that we must have, that there is an issue with this team coming off the bye. I don't think it's a really big conversation that needs to happen yet, but it definitely raised some eyebrows when I heard that stat the other day. I don't think we're going to lose any of those games. I think we're going to go 3-0 if I'm being completely honest, but something just to keep in mind. 3 buys, how Kansas State handles these weeks off might quietly decide their Big 12 fate. I mean, it's true. If you lose all 3 of these, you're not going to Arlington. That's for sure. Because most of these games are some of your easier matchups on the schedule. UCF, Oklahoma State. You could even possibly put Kansas into that category because Kansas State's schedule is not very easy whatsoever. So, of course, no matter how you look at it out of the bye, the third phase of the game can swing momentum, right? If you're looking at the bye, we got to talk about the third phase of the game. That's special teams. I want to talk about that next because we finally got a little bit of closure, if you will, on who's going to kick for Kansas State and Dublin. We'll talk about that next right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, this episode of Locked On Kansas State is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided that last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family, and maybe it's game day and you just suddenly realize that you want to be in the stands? Well, that's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drink, merch, or even invite a bigger group of friends to come with you. Game Time makes that all possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, first game, kickoff, you name it. And they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We finally got an idea of who's going to kick the field goals for Kansas State in 2025 because we weren't really sure what was happening on that side. Of course, there was a lot of question marks on what was going to happen. Nate Kagzor, the special teams coach, definitely gave a little bit of insight when he talked to the media just a few weeks ago. But until the depth chart came out on Monday, we didn't know for sure. But now we do have the idea, and I want to discuss that on today's episode. Luis Rodriguez, the guy who just came over in the transfer portal, transfer sophomore, is going to be the starting field goal kicker, and then Tegan Cobb will be the backup when it comes to that. Simon McClan will still be the punter in this one. So at least you got an idea. McClanahan is going to do kickoffs, but Rodriguez taking over Chris Tennett's spot as kicking field goals. And as we all know, going back to, I feel like we've talked about this game too many times over the last couple of days, but going back to that Kansas game, that game-winning field goal by Chris Tennett made you hold your breath. Now you're going to hope that Luis Rodriguez can make that happen. He's the most available kicker in camp. That's what Kagzor said. And a strong early impression is what he felt as well about that. He did like what he saw from Cub, though. That's something to keep in mind, but he is sidelined by injury. He's not even on the depth chart, but he felt he was very talented. He liked what he saw early, so something to keep in mind. as we get down the road later in the season, if unfortunately the Luis Rodriguez project doesn't work out um, the way we hope so. This actually what led to the Rodriguez addition was the injury to Cub Pat. Uh, he wants a clear starter. He said that. Coach Nate said that he wanted a clear starter preferred. He likes the fact of having a guy that does field goals, a guy that does kickoffs. He wants to just have them. But what he did say is he wants the backups to feel more like a 1B than a 2 on the depth chart. So that means when you're looking at someone like Tegan Cobb, that of course is number 2 on the field goal unit for the depth chart, could be seen as a 1B. So I want to see how much of a leash they're going to give Luis Rodriguez right off the bat. You just brought him in the transfer portal in the summer window. He has not been with the club for quite some time. Now, this is a field goal kicker. It's not like you have to learn a lot of scheme, a lot of plays. You're a specialist. You're the one that has to kick the ball through the uprights. That doesn't take much difference if you're either playing at Kansas State, if you're playing in Cincinnati. It doesn't matter. It's probably the least impacted player when it comes to transfer portal is kickers, if I'm being completely fair on that situation. But Luis Rodriguez going to get the start as the field goal kicker in Dublin this Saturday. Exciting stuff. Exciting stuff. Looking at the return game, keeping on the special teams conversation, Dylan Edwards listed as the top punt returner. That's something to keep in mind there. He's also listed as the top kick returner. Although he's going to be running back 1, he's listed as the top guy in the special teams return game. Now, Coach Nate did say he will, quote, certainly be used, but reps could be reduced to save him for offense. And he would talk about how you got to respect the offense to make sure it's all for the best of the team. But as of right now, Dylan Edwards looks like he's going to be the dude on the special teams unit. Devon Rice, keep talking about Devon Rice. He's all over the place. He was seen on the kick return unit as well in the depth chart. And then Sterling Lockett. Could this be the year of Sterling Lockett? Can we finally get Sterling Lockett to step up? He's seen as the second punt returner behind Dylan Edwards, which means that he will get a lot of playing time as the punt returner. Look, Dylan Edwards is the number 1 kick returner and punt returner on the team. He's explosive. He's dynamic. He's electric. When you can find a way to get him back there and you feel safe in doing so, then he's going to be back there, especially if you have just the slightest lack of trust by some of the other players, because you know that Edwards can get it done. But if this game's tight, if this game forces you to make sure that you need Dylan Edwards on offense, you're going to see Sterling Lockett take those punt returns. You're going to see Devon Rice or possibly Bryce Nornberg taking those kick returns, which are 2 redshirt freshmen for the record. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Final note from Coach Nate here. We talked about developing special teams players as a whole, and he said that he wants to make sure that the main focus is developing special teams talent from the bottom half of the roster, which I actually think is amazing. And of course, we all know that most players towards the bottom half of the roster find themselves making a contribution on special teams before they usually make a contribution on offense or defense. Then you kind of get promoted to those other offense or defenses, and it's seen as a huge milestone for those special teams players. And it builds confidence, right? You get to see growth in game performance. They step up, they move forward, but having some really good dogs on special teams, look, they don't call it 2 facets or 2.5 facets of the game. They call it all 3 facets of the game. Special teams is a huge part of college football. We've seen it with the kicking game. We've seen it with the return game in Kansas State alone last season. And not just the return game on the Dylan Edwards side, but stopping and slowing down the return side of the opponent. And having that type of play from some of our young linebackers that we did last year, some of our young safeties, some of our young wide receivers, you name it, it's going to be really nice to see who steps up on the special team side in 2025. I think that might be the most underrated part of the football game, especially when I go back and watch the game for the second time, right? Like, of course, you're going to get instant reactions from me on the game. For example, on Saturday, we're going to have reactions. We're going to talk about the game. We're going to have an episode on the press conference alone as well. But later on in the week, I sit back usually. It's usually on a Sunday or a Monday. And I actually watch the game again, see what I missed. And it's always something on the special team side that sticks out to me and says, man, that guy is going to be good. And we're going to, of course, talk about that on this show, Locked On Kansas State, because we're bringing you coverage every single day of the week, folks. Football season is here. We're just a couple days away from Dublin. Hey, I got great guests coming on for you this week. I'm everywhere as well. You can see me on Locked On College Football later on the week, Locked On Big 12, you name it. Locked On Kansas State. We're going to have you covered all the way up till Dublin and so much more. So be sure to hit that subscribe button right wherever you're listening. Leave a comment. Drop some conversations below. Let's keep talking Kansas State all the way up until Dublin and furthermore, and keep going into there. All right, guys, please like the video. Please subscribe. And this has been Locked On Kansas State.